Well, what about that tattoo on your chest? Doesn't it say die, Bart, die?
No, that's German for the Bart. The.
Ah, boy. Dead Bart. This is another classic story in the vein of Squidward's suicide or Suicide Mouse. And indeed, it served as part of the inspiration to Squidward's suicide. You see this phrase? Yeah, blame this fucking story for its complete overuse to the point of becoming a joke in creepypastas. Now obviously, nowadays in creepypastas, a lost episode story is nothing special. But like we're gonna do with Ben Drowned later on this season, we're gonna try and put ourselves in the position of someone who's never read a story like this before to try and be as objective as possible. Was this actually a good story for the time that's only been made worse by countless ripoffs and cheap imitations? That's what we're trying to find out today. However, this is a really short story, so I'm not going to be able to go super in-depth like I normally do. There simply isn't enough content. As a result, we're going to go the hero Brian route. No segments, just talking about the story, so let's get into it. Our story begins with our author explaining a phenomenon regarding the numbered order of Simpsons episodes. I don't know about you guys, but I just pissed my pants. Apparently, this is due to a lost episode from Season 1 not being counted by Fox, making some episodes out of order. That's alright. Season 1 is pretty weak as far as early Simpsons is concerned. I'm sure we didn't miss much. Apparently, no one likes to talk about the episode. Probably because it doesn't exist, and it was written entirely by series creator Matt Groening. Unlike Squidward's Suicide though, which just has a bunch of faceless, nameless production staff, random interns, and Steven Hillenburg, God rest his soul, this pasta actually bothers to bring up other production team members like Dan Silverman, an animator who worked primarily on earlier Simpsons episodes, particularly Season 1, which this story is centered around. This isn't too bad. Normally when pastas try to give extra information, all it does is end up contradicting actual events. We saw this happen in Ed, Edd n Eddy the Lost Episode 2, as well as Squidward's Suicide, of course. On the subject, this is what the story consists of next. Accounts saying that any mention of the episode to Groening or Silverman or any of the production staff results in anger or complete silence. The structure is odd here, though. We have the explanation of Silverman ending a presentation hours early. What kind of presentation is never specified, then it suddenly swaps to production information, then back to crew member reactions. It's not like the writing is awful so far. It's above average at this point for lost episodes, which isn't saying much, but this needs to be paced better. Back on topic again, apparently asking production staff about the show will get them to try and stop you from contacting Matt Groening. The reasons why are apparent when our author asks him about it at a fan event, again unspecified, and he tearfully gives him a piece of paper, then asks him never to mention the episode again. Considering how popular the story got, I'm sure Matt is very proud of this guy. Also, some lost episode this must be if Matt Groening will just give you the link to it at the first mention of it, and good job on everyone else for not even supervising him at a public event if it's that vitally important to you. He follows the link, he won't give it to us of course because he's very lazy, downloads a file, and bricks his computer. Good job. Should've just deleted your System 32, that's where spongecry.avi is anyway. He manages to burn the file to a CD and opens it up to play the episode proper. Like in a lot of other lost episode pastas, the animation quality is apparently very poor. Going back in time for a second, I still don't get why this is supposed to be scary. Bad 2D animation is honestly one of the funniest things that can happen, unless it's Steven Universe, so I can't get a creeped out vibe imagining it. Rough 3D animation can be scary, look at the Pharaoh from Courage the Cowardly Dog, but having the Simpsons putz about at a slow frame rate with their mouths moving out of sync is substantially more funny than scary. The characters are also acting out of order. Homer, for example, is acting much angrier. Yeah, the character who strangles his son is acting uncharacteristically angry. I'm excited to see where this goes. Speaking of, Bart seems to fucking hate his parents, and I can only imagine why. The pacing here seems off too. There's not much build-up at all before the horrible event that kills Bart ends up happening. One paragraph explaining the odd character behavior, and then the entire first act leading up to Bart getting sucked out of an airplane's window. So apparently, according to the author, Matt Groening had an idea that the animated style of the Simpsons world represented life, and that death turned things more realistic. That's avant-garde, to say the least, especially in a comedy show. The point is, this leads to Bart's corpse being shown very realistically, because I guess they couldn't afford a closed casket funeral for a barely recognizable child, as the entire family cries over his death. Of course, the crying intensifies, leading to very realistic crying. Better acting than you would think possible. This is getting pretty silly. It's hard enough trying to take a Simpsons story seriously, but lines like this don't help at all and give me bad flashbacks to Squidward's suicide, even though this came first. And yeah, professional voice actors can't cry realistically. Okay. The animation gets worse as this happens, including a specific mention of blurring. Well, that explains a lot with the fucking Ed, Edd and Eddy story. That one was obsessed with blurring. It still isn't scary here, although you could interpret this as the family is being warped by the loss of Bart, so there's at least more going on here than just, ooh, it's not how it's supposed to look, it's not how it's normally drawn, isn't that spooky? A year passes between Acts 2 and 3, yeah, all of Act 2 is just crying, and the family looks like shit. I like how the story mentions there's no sign of Maggie or the pets, but they haven't been mentioned at all prior to this. They visit Bart's grave, and on the way, Springfield looks just as shit, as if it's been abandoned. Apparently, Bart's death had a real impact on the place. I guess that makes sense. After all, the town did drive him to near suicide over missing a baseball once. Once they're at Bart's grave, the corpse is just lying there, like they didn't even bother to bury him. Gravedigger Billy just couldn't bring himself to do it. Yes, I went on the Simpsons wiki to find out if Springfield had a gravedigger. So they cry! And apparently Homer tells an inaudible joke because he can't read the room, and the shot zooms out on the cemetery as the episode draws to a close. On the tombstones are all of the celebrity guest stars on The Simpsons. The ones who have died have their accurate death dates written on them, and almost all of the others who haven't yet have the same date of death. The actual date is, of course, not given because that would mean the story could potentially be dated. The best part of this ending is confirming that one day Andy Dick is going to die. But yeah, that's the last episode, and that's the ending. I appreciate that it goes for the horror punchline thing I've talked about before, but it's so completely disconnected from everything else discussed previously that all it accomplishes is giving the audience whiplash. This whole story is just weird and all over the place. It feels like it was written in one sitting and the author got bored by the time he actually sat down to write the episode itself. The whole thing feels extremely rushed. How many things were brought up and then completely dropped? All the characters are apparently completely different, but the only thing we ever see them do is fucking cry. Bart hates his parents, but he's flung out of an airplane only a few sentences after describing that. There's apparently these faces flashing in the window as the family is crying and warping. Yeah, that's never brought up again. Are they the faces of the celebrities who died? What's the deal with that? What is this happy-appy prediction garbage? You'd think if they had this knowledge of future celebrity deaths, they would have made sure Seth MacFarlane got on Flight 11. Unless they really wanted that Family Guy Simpsons crossover. Or hey, maybe you could have kept Phil Hartman alive and killed Andy Dick instead, you fuck! And everyone dies on the same day, so I guess that's talking about the apocalypse? Well, The Simpsons has done a good job of predicting shit so far. I sure fucking hope this one's true the way things are going now. Overall, this wasn't oh yeah, there's a Dead Bart sequel. Yeah, even Squidward's Suicide and Suicide Mouse didn't go for the sequel approach, but Dead Bart couldn't keep its grubby little yellow four-fingered hands off the attention. It's more of an update than a sequel, so if I had to compare it to anything, it's that little addendum at the end of Username 666 that barely warrants mentioning. This isn't like a Sonic.exe 2. Well, let's get it over with then. The guy gets rid of his computer now that it's been sufficiently fucked. He can't get the episode off of it, and it plays randomly on its own. Is this a paranormal occurrence or just the work of a virus? Don't know, don't care, story probably doesn't either. Because both Dead Bart and this are so short, he decides to pad it out by explaining that he's been having dreams where Bart is replaced by him, and he became Skelebart and wrote this. After doing some research, he explains that apparently the episode aired once in Portland, Oregon. Portland. a very densely populated city on the western United States coast. You can't do a Candle Cove thing where it aired in one place at one time and have that place be extremely populated. And it doesn't even make sense. The Simpsons runs on Fox. Candle Cove was a local channel, so it made sense that it wouldn't have been broadcast nationwide. And everything I could find on production companies for The Simpsons lists them all in Los Angeles. So if it's gonna be in any city, it would be in the one that the show was produced in, right? The only connection is that's where Matt Groening was born, so of course that's where it airs, right? That makes complete sense. Thankfully, our author has a cousin in Portland who saw the episode, but he remembers it as a nightmare. Bart's nightmare. Please stop ripping off Candle Cove. You weren't doing well when you were doing your own thing, but now you're doing a worse job at something good someone else already did. The cousin is so traumatized by having the episode brought up to him and proven to be real that he hangs up and never responds again. So now we have our main character attempting some kind of Marble Hornet style tape hunting investigation, but it doesn't even make any sense because he already has the episode short of one line from Homer, or at least he did before he ditched the computer he had it on. But now he's willing to buy a tape of it from someone who just happens to have it. Lost media is so huge now that I can't believe this guy wouldn't circulate it on the internet somewhere, or just go the Reddit route and destroy it or render it unusable. But he buys the tape. It's almost exactly the same, and then he just destroys it. Oh, but this time, we do get the commercials from when the episode aired, which include monsters from the author's dreams, news stories about future tragedies, and some weird 3D animation. One of these things is not like the other. He has a friend watching with him, which is bizarre considering how much this tape has traumatized him and his cousin, who sees different things, including an account of millions of people dying in their sleep at once. This is the explanation for the tombstones. And the kicker? We finally get a date for those tombstones. The magnificent far-off year of 2013. And hey, if none of that was funny enough for you, we finally get Homer's joke. He looks at Bart's corpse and says, "If only we all were that lucky." Perfect. Not even proper English. And yes, how lucky Bart was to be thrown from an airplane to plummet to his death, knowing for several seconds that there was no way to survive, no time to fully comprehend or accept what was going to happen. Sheer panic and confusion, only to be turned into fucking jelly by the time he reached the ground, as opposed to the horrific, gruesome, unimaginable death by sleep. For fuck's sake, Homer. This story can eat my shorts. Wow. I don't think I've ever seen a story so mediocre turn itself into complete schlock with its sequel. Let's just review what we've been over. Dead Bart is by no means a good story. Halfway through, it just kind of gets drunk and flops around on a keyboard for several paragraphs before waking up the next morning and trying to write a spooky conclusion. What's weird is the setup wasn't the worst thing I've ever heard for a lost episode story. Not amazing, but not Squidward's suicide either. It's the episode itself that loses me. It's very monotonous, uneventful outside of Bart's actual death, which is handled very briefly, and it's just not scary. And even then, there's loads of things it glosses over. This is the Squidward suicide problem all over again, where the episode itself is so sparsely described. This fucker has a copy of a lost episode of The Simpsons, and can't be fucked to give a more detailed synopsis. Bart dies in a fucking sentence. Also, Bart's death, for a story called Dead Bart and all, really has nothing to do with the actual horror factor. You're left to visualize what the author can only describe as a hyper-realistic Bart Simpson corpse, and that's kind of it. The only thing left is to sort of feel bad for the rest of the Simpsons, but that's not scary. It's actually interesting to see how many problems translate over to Squidward's suicide, considering this was one of that story's inspirations along with Suicide Mouse. And really, looking at it now, it's easy to see how so many modern lost episode pastas wind up so terrible. This isn't a good first impression at all. This or Suicide Mouse. However, it left a lot up to the imagination. Arguably too much since so many things are dropped or go unexplained in such a short time, but things like when or how the world will end or Homer's joke are left to audience interpretation, which could make them scarier. until the update comes along. This ruins any goodwill I had towards this story. It goes way, way overboard on the paranormal aspect, making it seem as though the episode itself is cursed, and all who see it are affected in different ways. It destroys the lost factor by broadcasting it in a densely populated area for the sake of a tangential connection to Matt Groening. And its explanation of the world-ending scenario is not only extremely mundane, but also laughably dated. I made fun of it a bit, but this is why he should have just kept the date unknown. It's way better than something like this. Overall, Dead Bart is hardly one of the worst creepypastas I've read. It's mercifully short, but it's not very entertaining. The sequel is total pond scum. Even with how short it is, you should only read it if you have nothing better to do. But hey, it's been a while since we had this part of the video. It's time to get to everyone's favorite section where we look at some comments. Let's start off with Dead Bart. Here's the most recent one. How did you actually manage to describe what happened on Lost episode in such a great detail? What the fuck are you talking about? What the fuck are you talking about? He didn't describe jack shit! Great detail, the first act is gone over in a paragraph. The first act to like a 22-minute episode. I think we can all agree that the short video and story do not match. There's a video here. Oh dear God, that is irritatingly loud. Oy vey, this is dreadful. Okay, they're clearly on a plane. Oh, this is just annoying to watch. This isn't even scary. Why is it in Spanish? Why is it in Spanish? And then it just ends with Lisa and not the tombstones. Well, I'm not even sure if this was made by the same guys. Like, that criticism hardly applies to the story. These are usually fan-made, these kinds of shitty videos. And they're all made the same way. Like, you put a fucking filter over it, you add some staticky effects and shit, and then you just insert hardly related clips of the show, and you call that a lost episode. Nothing bad even has to happen. Nothing scary has to happen. But yeah, most of this comment is just criticizing the video. Also, Matt Groening spreads computer viruses. What the fuck? 4 out of 10, at least it was short. Yeah, its length is definitely a high point, since it doesn't waste too much of your fucking time. Some horsefucker says, I'm guessing the implication here is that Groening saw some sort of horrific disaster in the near future and made this episode as a warning, which is plenty spooky. No, the tape is just cursed. That's it. Sorry. You're gonna hate the fucking sequel. What I don't understand is, why this episode in particular? Why kill Bart? Why have a second act that consists solely of crying? Yeah, that's the thing, is like, the Bart thing has really nothing to do with anything. The story's called Dead Bart, Bart dies, nothing else is related. Still, this was a good read, I give it a solid 7 out of 10. It feels like you had plenty bad to say about it, but okay. This creepypasta is fake, honestly. Yeah, they're all fake, you fucking tit. That video is edited. You're hard to fool. Terrible, but a classic nonetheless. 11 out of 1. The thing about these pastas, sure they're cliche and boring now, but at the time they were good enough to make themselves into what we consider our cliches today. These pastas spawned cliches. Remember that as you're reading. Yeah, but it's not good to begin with. That's the biggest fucking thing. Is like, just describing something as hyper-realistic doesn't make it good. It doesn't make it scary. Why is that scary? How is that scary? What does that have to do with anything? So the fact that a bunch of people just adopted that doesn't make it like, ooh, it's a trendsetter. I mean, I guess it makes it a trendsetter, but it doesn't make it a good trendsetter. Like, hey, cutting the tips off of babies' dicks was trendy. It's still trendy. Thousands of years later, people are still cutting the tips off of babies' dicks. Is that a good thing? I don't fucking think so. Let's end off with this one for Dead Bart. Rip Bart. He kicked the window of a plane and went splat. Idiot. Alright, let's read the comments for the update now. There's not nearly as many for this one. This is not well known. I think because it's such garbage. Like, even the people in the comments they're not happy about this. But it's in the historical archive, so it's staying here. Am I the only one who's giving it a 10 out of 10? Yeah, it looks kind of like it, because we got K.I. Simpson tries to coattail off the success of his original subpar creepypasta by making a dumb plot point that claims it aired in Portland, as well as clearly trying to make it like Candle, but at least we know what Homer's joke was now. 2 out of 10. 1 out of 10. Terrible. Well, at least we know what Homer said. This guy just says, ugh, stop with Dead Bart. -600 out of 10. Even I'm not that harsh on this story. I just think it's shit. Thanks, but no thanks. Dead Bart was great enough and didn't need a follow-up. I'll give it a 3 out of 10. Boy, this guy's giving a more in-depth critique than my own. Fucking Falco over here. After reading both, the story is just very unremarkable. I know it's old, but it has gained a bit of a cult following over the years, so I figured it would be worth looking back on. I don't know if it's that this story hasn't aged well or if it was just bland to begin with, but the story hits a lot of beats that other creepypasta handle better. Quite a few points are iterated several times, but they're never delved into. A Dead Bart update tries to fix this by making some things more clear, but it only leaves more confusing story beats. Making vague descriptions of what you're seeing doesn't engage the reader, and it isn't very immersive, and the cover-up plot point from the start of the first story makes no sense when you're getting so much information off of the internet and phone calls. All very good points so far. I almost forgot that it was like basically this big cover-up thing. Once I got to the sequel, I was just like, ooh, this is supposed to be lost and obscure. No, they actively tried to cover it up, and god are they garbage at it. I feel there are quite a few missed opportunities as well. Like, the story behind the production of the episode would have been something very interesting to go into. Why is the story so paranormal? Why does it stick to your hard drive? Don't make points that you're just going to fly by for no reason without explaining. Again, it's insulting to the reader's suspension of disbelief. Since OP had a computer, they could have done something like analyze the episode. The fact that it was constantly repeating itself without being prompted only gave the main character more leeway to do that. So it's weird that there wasn't any sort of depth. I agree completely. That was one of my biggest issues, is just like, this guy has no reason to not give a fully in-depth explanation of the episode, but he glosses by it like it's just not that big a deal, like we wouldn't be interested in it unless something horrible and disgusting happens. It just comes out as a flat story as a result. It might be something as you would be scared of at first when you're new to creepypasta, but it's definitely something I wouldn't recommend to someone who is looking for a good starting point. I'm not one for giving stories ratings out of 10. I'll just say how the story is below average. Not a lot is elaborated on, and almost nothing is explained in detail. It registers to me as an and then story. And then Bart fell out of the plane, and then the animation style changed, and then the second act started, and then they were crying the entire time. And an and then story just comes off as rather insulting to the reader. Definitely agreed. The writing style seems, again, I mentioned this, it seems a lot like he just sat down, wrote it in one sitting, sort of stream of consciousness style. It's not structured very well. It's just not very good. And hey, we got a familiar face in here. It's the author of Jeff the Killer 1x1, Dr. Bleed. Well, that was pretty unnecessary. The only thing I really enjoyed was how the author expanded on Homer's evil joke. Other than that, I can't really understand why this exists. I agree. I think that the author probably got a lot of messages or comments saying like they wanted to know more about certain things, and so they made this as a sort of, okay, you can shut up now. Here's when the date was, here's what Homer's joke was, and here's just a bunch of garbage for the first part, basically. It's all worthless. It's a worthless story. But that's going to be the end for this review. Thank you all for watching. Here's the links to my Twitter, Patreon, and gaming channel. And thanks to the patrons supporting me, who you can see listed here. Until next time.